This is Morph Target, and this button here is called Store Morph Target. And when I select this button, we're going to get some other buttons come active and the slider. So we're going to press Store Morph Target, and what this does, it stores this shape the way you see it. And another thing that is very, very important to know, if you look at the active point up here, it is storing the Morph Target on this many active points. And for this to always work, we need the exact amount of active points. So in other words, if I'm going to hide part of this mesh, and when I do this, what's going to happen is some of these buttons are going to get grayed out and my active points is going to change. So let's take a look at this. Control key, shift key, hold down, and we're going to drag and hide part of this. Now my buttons got grayed out and my active points have changed. So that's not good, but as long as you bring it back to the original state, we get our active points back and we get our buttons back. So let's go ahead and create something. All right, we need some type of deformation from the original box to kind of see how this works. We can use most any of these brushes in here, long as they don't add any more active points. If they do, this does not work. But in this instance, I'm going to go ahead and inflate this, and we'll hide this back, and the buttons are grayed out, and control key, shift key, and click to bring that back, and my buttons come back because I'm back to my original active points. As you can see here, now if I was to another thing that will usually switch this off is changing the subdivision levels. What I mean by that is, if we look at the geometry here, we have subdivision levels. If I was to move this down, the buttons come grayed out again. Let's go ahead and do some other type of deformation. So I'll just control key and mask part of this, and click on the canvas with the control key to invert this, and we're going to use the action line. The action line also deforms this, so I'm going to grab this middle right here and drag up and clear the mask. For this button to come back active, we need to go back to the original subdivision level, and this will bring us back to the same active points. Now we have our buttons back. So what does switch do? Well, basically, as you can see, this is our new shape here, and if we switch it, we'll switch it back to the original stored morph target. And if we switch it again, we can switch it back. Another thing is we have the delete morph target. This will allow you to delete the morph target and start all over if you wish to. So basically, do I want to start from here? I can press delete, then start a new one from here. Let's control Z that back. Or do I want to start from scratch again? I can go back to the original one by switching it back to the original one, press delete. Now I can store another one and start all over if I decide I want to. This is the create diff button here. It creates different mesh, and I'll need some kind of deformation to show you how this works first. So I will hold the control key down and the shift key at the same time and click and drag, then let go. And I will do some kind of deformation. It needs some type of deformation for this to work. And I can select anything in here. I'll just select the inflate a couple times as an example and bring this back. And I will hold the control key down and shift key and click to bring everything back. And what this create diff does, it's going to create a new mesh based on the difference between the original state one and the newly created one. So basically, this is the original one, and the newly created one was this kind of extruded one. So when we press create diff and we come up here, and it created a new mesh, we'll have to come up here and select it. Now if you notice, in the name you'll see the word diff, and that's a good indication it came from this create diff button here. So we'll go ahead and select that and we'll turn on polyframes, and you can see it's got kind of a inner and outer shell, and this one you'll need to start another morph target if you decide you want to go and start one here. We'll go back to the original one here, and we have this morph slider. Basically this will blend between this state here and the original one here. There will be a little bit of blending between the two. So we'll turn the switch back, and we can move it to the right all the way to 100%, and it goes all the way back to the original state. And we can always go to the negative on this one also, so that's kind of cool. And then you can mess with the X, Y, and Z how you want to. We have the morph slider here. It's project morph slider. It's grayed out right now, and basically what this does, it can help fix a lot of topology on the mesh. If we look at the mesh here at the forehead, I used this little nudge brush and I twirled it up, and it looks kind of cool here, but if we turn on the polyframes and look at this, it's all, the edge flows are kind of getting all twisted around and got a lot of twisting going on here. This is what we call bad geometry. This is kind of sloppy right here. So I want to fix this. So basically what I'm going to do is I want to store the morph target, and then I'm going to come up to geometry, and my high subdivision level on this one is number 3. I'm going to crank it down 1 notch. Now it depends on how many subdivision levels you have. You can crank it down more. Then I'm going to go ahead and delete the highest one. Now typically you don't have to do this, but it's highly recommend you do it, and I highly recommend you to do it, because it'd be a little bit technical for me to explain, and I don't want to get into that, but just follow along and you'll be alright. So how can I fix this all messiness going on right here? Well, we have the deformation here, and we have this. We could use this polish. There's other things that we can use, all different types of stuff, but I'm going to use a polish, and I'm going to use it to extreme so it really shows up on the video. So I'm focusing on the forehead here, and I'm going to polish it. Well, it kind of smoothed everything out just a little too much. Well, that's not going to be a problem. So if we look here, we can see our buttons are grayed out is because we moved the geometry slider. Now if I bring it back to the original subdivision level by dividing it one more time, we're still going to maintain our geometry structure here. We didn't lose anything, so we're just fine. And then we got the project. We have this little white circle here. Well, if you have it open, basically on most of these little white icons, if they're open, usually it helps maintain the volume. If they're closed, it will kind of smooth it out. Well, I'm going to just leave it smooth out a little bit. Now if I move this slider all the way to the right, I know for a fact it will go ahead and smooth out this ear so much it will kind of mess it up. So let me just do this once and I'll show you. And well, the forehead looks good. Back of ears chopped off. That's not going to work. So let's Control Z that and bring it back. I want to just isolate the area right here. So I'm going to hold the Control key and we're going to do some masking in this area. And I'm going to Control key click to kind of blend this a little bit, and click on the canvas with the Control key to invert this. This way when I project it, it doesn't tamper with the ears. It doesn't tamper with anything that's masked. I just want to project in this area for right now. So I'll move the project all the way to the right and give it a second, and as you can see here, it fixed a lot of the sloppiness in the geometry. So basically, if I switch right here, there's the original, and you can kind of see it's kind of sloppy, and we'll switch it back. So how would I fix the rest of the mesh? Well, that's easy. Well, I'm going to invert the mask by holding the control key down and clicking on the background. This is going to invert it, and I want to bring out everything back to the original state. So I'm going to use this blend morph and move it all the way to the right, and it's going to bring everything back, and you can see my ears are not chopped off. Let's remove the mask, and as you can see, if we turn on the wireframe here, you can see that the geometry is a lot smoother. If I switch it, there's the messiness. Take a good look here. Let me go ahead and zoom in real quick. Give me a second so we can really see this. There's the messiness, and when I switch it back, then you can see it's all nice and clean. Messiness and clean. Now if we turn off the polyframe here and we switch this, you can notice very little bit of difference. I mean, it's not too bad, and that's because I had the smoothing on. If I turn this off, I could have got a little bit better maintaining the volume, but this is good enough because I rather have good geometry flow right here. So that looks pretty good, and that straighten that out. We're going to go over the Morph Distance slider down here, and you notice it's always been grayed out. This is made for Z-sphere, so we're going to store Morph Target, and this works on the distance between this center one here, which is the main root, and the distance of the one I'm going to be moving right here, or posing. So this is a short distance between the two. If I move this up and out, we moved it up, plus we move the distance apart. If we move the morph distance all the way to the right, it's got the same distance as it had the distance down here, if that makes sense. So typically, if I bring it out here, let's delete the morph, and store the morph right here, and I bring it up, and then I bring it closer. Now it's gonna store the same distance, and this should bring it out. So it's basically the same distance where I stored it at here. This helps prevent abnormal stretching. I very seldom use this, so it's really up to you if you decide that you want to use this area here. Alright, I pretty much showed you how this worked. You might be saying, well, that didn't look too exciting. Well, I can't get into every detail, but I'll tell you what, there is a lot that you can do this, and a lot of fun. And I'm going to demonstrate a couple things, just some basic stuff, and I might not get into full detail, but you'll get the general idea as I go along here. So I'm going to store the morph target here, just do some off the wall stuff, and we're going to go to the deformation, and I'm going to do the R flatten, and I'm going to bring this down here. Alright, then I'm going to mask this with the control key, click and drag, and then I'm going to go over here and use this blend here and blend this up here, and that looks cool, and we're going to control key click, and we can get something like that. Then we'll use the blend to blend these back and forth, which is pretty neat. Let's go to Lightbox. Let's go into the tools. I got a bunch of extra stuff up here, so bear with me. There's more in my tools than you may have or different. So here's another thing that I like. It's pretty neat. We're going to go up to the subtools, and I want to create a remesh here and set the polish to 0, and it's going to create a type of a Lego looking dog here. And what I want to do is I want to select that Lego dog here, and I'm going to go down here and increase my distance for my projectile up to around a little over 3, and I'm going to shrink wrap it to the dog, and it's going to keep the same amount of points when I do this, so I'll project all, and we will go ahead and before I do that, let's go ahead and what I want to do is Control Z that before I project all. I got ahead of myself. I'm going to store the morph right there, and I'll come back up here and project all. Let's go ahead and delete that top dog here and press delete. So there's our new dog, and we can switch them back and forth. We got the same amount of polygons or points, active points, no matter which way I switch it. And this is really cool, and especially if you're using this morph brush here. And we'll go to morph, and we'll do a little morphing here, a little morphing down here, make them kind of like an armored dog or something like this. And there's just all kinds of neat stuff that you can do with this. You can I'm not going to go into any further, but let me close all this up here, and works really good with layers, and you can do a lot of morphs with layers, so this is very important, so just keep that in mind. This is poly paint. This allows you to paint on the polys in real time. We're going to paint on the polygons and without any texture being applied to the dog. The dog doesn't even need to have UVs here. Now this dog does come with ZBrush 2 Lightbox. This is just another modified version that I did with some UVs. So we're going to start with a colorize. As you can see, it's on here. And if we come up here and let's open up the subtools here, we got this little paint icon. If I uncheck it, you can kind of see what happens. Let me turn this back over to white here. So now we're not in poly paint mode. So I can select it here to turn it back on, or use the paint icon, which just got active again. So basically how this works, it paints on the polygons. So let's go up here. We'll switch the color, something real dark here, and we'll zoom in a little bit better. And actually when it starts painting here, actually starting on the vertice, and you can see how this is working right here. Then we got this gradient. If we turn this off, we don't have no gradient. So basically if we have two different colors, they don't blend very well together. If you have this on, you can see we started getting this fade look to it. Let me do a little bit more here so you can kind of see here. And I'll turn that back off, and there's no fade. So we're going to keep that in mind. Control Z it a few times. So we got this next one. It's grayed out, poly paint from texture. Well, we need to have some texture on. We're going to select this one here, and if you don't have no UVs on this dog, this also will still stay not selected. Let me show you. I'll just go ahead and delete the UVs here, and we need UVs for this to work. So let's Control Z that. So basically I'm going to go ahead and now we're going to press it. Now you notice that the doesn't look so good. It's all blurry, and the reason why is because there's not enough polygons. This is the first thing that you kind of want to set up before you start painting. You can paint on the polygons, but you're not painting on the texture. but you can paint with texture. So let's go ahead and go up to geometry here, and I'm not going to crank it too high, but it needs to be kind of high. And you can always test this by pressing this button and subdividing it at the same time, or in that kind of in that order, and that way when you can look at the texture and see how it's fitting. If it's fairly decent and crisp, it's alright. If it's kind of blurry, you probably need to add some more polygons. So basically, if I turn this off, this is polypaint. This is actually polypaint right here. I can actually paint color on it, and it's in real time, and meaning I can rotate this around and sit there and paint on it. Then we got this one here. It's called polypaint from texture, from polygroups, I'm sorry. But this dog does not have any polygroups right now. Well, I'll have to Control Z this back so you can kind of see there is no polygroups. But what we can do, it does have UVs, so remember, if I select here, let's move this around here. What I can do easily to get some polygroups on this is we're going to go to the polygroups, and we're going to auto group with the UVs. So we're going to go ahead and select this, and we're going to get a set of groups here in just a second. And there you go. Just like it was laid out when I was morphing it. Now it's all color coded. So our next step, if we want to, we're going to go ahead and turn this off. I want to apply some texture again, and I'm going to polypaint from texture. There's my new polypaint. Now if I ever want to convert this over to a texture, because this is all polypaint, is what I can do is, let's go ahead and close some of this up here, go down to the texture map, and it says new from polypaint. So when I press this, then there's our new map. Not going to get into this right here, but we're going to try sticking into the polypaint. So let me go ahead and Control Z this back, and we're going to start kind of fresh here with some little tips. I'm going to show you a few tips and how to fix a few things, because these are common things that most people have trouble with. As you can see, when I Control Z it back, we remove the texture. Okay, now if this texture is active and I try painting with polypaint, I can't see it because the texture is on. We don't want to have the texture on. Control Z this back a couple times. So there's a tip number one. Personally, when I polypaint, I don't even come down here and turn this on or off for polypainting. Let's switch this over to white. Most of the times I have my subtools open, and I use this paint icon to turn on or off polypaint. So that's tip number two. And most of the times, well, a lot of times, don't ever paint with that on. Not that you can't, but I'm not trying to deform this dog. I want to do just painting. So basically, I wouldn't have that on. We can paint with just material. Let's say I wanted to switch to another material and paint with it. This is what happens. The whole thing switches, and no matter what I select, it's going to switch. So how can I paint with material? Well, what we'll have to do is when we select one of these options here, it doesn't matter if it's material or color and material, and we come over to the color palette, and you can see that the M is active. That means I'm going to fill this object just with material. Alright, and if I selected RGB, I would just be filling the object with just color. If I selected mRGB, I'd be filling the object with material and color. Since we filled it with material, we can switch to something else and paint on dog. As you can see, this material, it gets a little choppy around the edges, and I'm not going to go into this part, but there's a render setting where this kind of blends into the other one. So personally, I don't paint in this mode, but if you want to, you can. So they improved it, but I'm not going to go into that part. Let's Control Z this back, and I want to Control Z this back far enough where I didn't fill the object here. I'll be able to know when this starts switching. Okay, now I'm in polypaint mode, and if I want to paint on just color, we'll just RGB, and we can paint on the dog. Control Z that. We can also paint with texture. Personally, I like the drag rec here, and you can kind of drag out. Control Z that. So when you are painting with texture, and let's say I drag this thing out, texture looks halfway decent. And if I go to the geometry here and I move it down and move it back up, it restores itself and looks fairly decent. But if I turn it down and polypaint with this, and if I crank it back up, it's not gonna look so good. You always got to kind of stay high when you are painting with texture. You can see the first one's coming back, but the one when I painted with a lower subdivision level, it's not coming back. So let's Control Z that. Now when we are painting with just color, it's not that big of a deal here. I'll crank it up, and you can't even hardly tell the difference. I'll crank it all the way down, and I'll paint right here. So you got to kind of be careful with that texture when you are painting with it, and because you really need to kick it up pretty much the highest subdivision levels when you're doing texture painting. And Control Z that. Add a little paint back here one more time, and some texture one more time. And let's say this is going to be my finished result. So basically what I want to do, and I want to create a texture, we'll just come down here, and we're going to go to the UV maps. Going to create a new texture map at 2048 by 2048. We're just going to click this once. Then we're going to go to the texture map. Then we're going to press new from Polypaint. Give it a few seconds, and there's our new texture map at 2048 by 2048. If we look at the texture and we move the subdivision level down to number 1, you can see that it didn't distort. Now if we take a look at this with the texture off, we're going to take a look at it with the Polypaint, and you can see how that looks with the lower subdivision level. So the texture map and Polypaint is two different things. with texture it really doesn't make that big of a difference. The only thing with texture is you can't paint on it, and if it's texture like it is right now, we can't poly paint on it and paint on it in real time. So basically what I'm saying is, if I come over here and try to adding another texture to this, not going to work. If I try adding some color to it, it's not going to work because there's a texture on it. If you recall earlier, I was talking about painting with material, and one of the reasons why I don't paint with material is because we get this jagged edge. Now there's other ways that we can fix this. This is improved, but I'm going to show you a different way where you can paint with color, and it's going to appear like you're painting with two different materials. As you can see, we're just painting with color right now. I am using this material here that you can get in Lightbox under the project file. It's called Two-Tone Beetle. It comes in with ZBrush 4 R2. Now we have two of these colors right here. We have the secondary and we have this main color. I will be pressing the Alt key to be switching between these two. So with that said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the Alt key, and we're going to start with this darker color here. And when I press it down and start painting, as you can see, it looks real shiny in this area. And it appears that I am painting with two different materials, because now we have a shiny one and this one in the back, or this pinkish one, it looks different. And we can always change this up by changing colors. So I'm going to let go of the Alt key here, and we'll get something like that. If I switch to a different color, then we kind of get this flat color right here. If we even get a little bit darker, we get this shininess that starts coming back. So I'm going to go into the next step, and since we was talking about Morph Target, I'm going to store the Morph Target here. And I'm doing that for a reason, because I'm going to be smoothing out some of these edges, or kind of blending these edges out, and I'm going to be also blending some of these colors together. And when I do that, I need to use the Shift key to do this, and it also smooths out the mesh. So if I hold the Shift key down, you can see it's kind of blending everything together. But at the same time, it's smoothing out the mesh. So let's paint a little bit more down here so we can see the list a little bit better. Let me go ahead and switch to a different alpha. Let me turn down just a little bit here. I'm going to press the Alt key and get a little in here. Now I'm not going to model the whole thing or paint the whole thing, but you'll see the general idea here in a second. So this should show up pretty good when I hold the Shift key down. Now when I hold the Shift key down, you've got this option to adjust the intensity, and you do this while the Shift key is already held down. You see I got the blue cursor. This means that this is going to smooth it out. Yeah, there it goes. Now you can really see it really good. Kind of blending these colors a little bit together. So now that we got the colors a little bit blended together, let's do it really hard on the nose here. Now if I come over to the subtool and I turn off the poly paint, notice it's kinda smooth there. So if we go ahead and switch this, we get our detail back. You can see the nose pop out there, and I'll switch it back, and we're going to switch it again. I'm going to delete the morph and store it again. I need to do this each time that I switch that. Let's turn this back on with the polypaint mode. Then we can proceed to add more colors or whatever we want to do to this. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but if I want to start erasing some of this color here, you can see the original color down here at the neck area and on top of the head. Well, we can go ahead and select our cursor in here and hold the mouse button down. When we drag it out, we get this picker sign that comes up by our cursor, and we're going to drag it down here and let go. Now this will give us some area that we can start wiping away and erasing it. I'm going to do a little comparison with polypainting, and I'm doing a little comparison by polypainting one way and polypainting with the projection master. So let's get started. Painting just with material, Zad's off, and I'm going to paint with the mesh facing directly at me and just kind of drag out. And what's happening is when I'm dragging on the mesh, it's crawling right up the polygons. If I turn it to the side here, look at all the crevice areas like the ears and around the eye sockets, the nose. It's not missing anything. So we're going to keep that in mind. Let's Control Z that and Control Z that again. So we're going to use the projection master, and we're going to paint with just material. We're going to drop now, and we are in polypaint mode with the projection master. So once again, it switched the tool here, and we can no longer turn this. So let me go ahead and increase my draw size up. I like to always have these up no matter what I do anyway, and we'll just go ahead and paint some material right here, and we'll project this. Now if we turn it to the side, you can see that the material didn't get transferred right in the nose area or these deep crevices. For me to fix this, I have to keep on turning this around when I'm reprojecting this. We'll Control Z this. So we'll go ahead and go into the next step here, and I'm going to press projection here, and I'm going to do just color. Now here's a little tip. When you're doing just color, it's best to come up to your channel here and use the channel that you're going to use only. RGB is just for color. If you want to see the true color, make sure your RGB intensity is at the fullest, because if I tone it down here and I have color and material, I'm getting this material and color mix. Well, anyway, the projection master is going to ignore that, and it's going to do just color. So we're going to keep that in mind. So we're always going to match up to what the projection master has. So it says that we want to do just color, then we're going to paint just color. We can also paint with a 3D tool here. Now when we switch different tools, items up here will change. So if we want to see the true effect, we'd want the RGB for just color. If I switch it to this one and leave it by default, we get this dark green here. And if we bring it to the color here, because this is what the projection master is going to recognize and only paint with it anyway. As you can see, this has it looks like it has some depth, but when I project this, it's going to be flat. So it's basically just a color and it's flat. And as you can see, it's missed a lot of spots. Control Z that. Now we can use this fade and turn it off, and it'll pick up a little bit more. As you can see, now it's not so faded. But you can see this, we got this flat ring, and if we want a little depth, we can go over here, projection master, and we can select the shaded. So we're just doing depth, so we'll just select this ring here. And we get a little depth. Now another thing it does, it darkens the whole mesh up, and typically I don't use this part right here. Let's Control Z this a little bit back a little bit further. Then we're going into the next step. Now we're going to turn this off, and we're going to press material. So what are the two things we have? Colors and materials, and we're going to drop this. So once again, whatever we're selecting, we need to select the mRGB for material and color. But I'm not going to select this right now because I want to switch a tool. And when I switch here, this also switch, so we'll switch this over here, and we're going to paint with color and material. And you can kind of switch it up around. I had paused the video so we can go in the next step, so we'll go to the projection master, and we have this double-sided. What this does is when you're painting on one side and it's done finished projecting, it will project the opposite side that you're painting on, and it will also project the side that you are painting on. So basically the front and the back. And we have this deformation right here. And when I turn it on and off, we get this icon that appears, and it's showing that we get this little kind of a depth here. If I check to normalize, the depth gets a little bit larger. So I'm going to bring it down here so it's not so large, and I'm going to press cancel. Before this to work, we need some more subdivision levels, and it will look a whole lot better. So I'm going to click this and crank it up to number 5. Normally I would go probably one more if I could, and for this demonstration we'll just keep it at 5. And we'll just uncheck the material for right now, and we'll just go ahead and drop this. Now I was messing with it earlier, so it automatically switched over to a ring, and I'm going to drag this ring out here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the move mode, and what this is going to do is I want to have it project pretty flat on the surface much as possible. It could be a little bit off, but if you move it around, it will stick to the mesh a whole lot better, because actually there's some depth, and it will follow around the contour of the depth. This works a whole lot better when you have a mesh facing directly at you rather than way out to the side. This will get some unpredictable results, so we want to keep it away from the edges. And we'll do one about right here, and we'll project this. And as you can see right here, that it projected. Sometimes you'll get this real jaggedness. That's not a problem. You can hold the shift key and kind of smooth that out. And we have this reset. What this reset does is puts all these settings back at default. You can see that the deformation's on and the color's on, so I press reset and I come back, then it puts everything back at default. I Control Z this a few times to bring it back to the original state, and we'll select the projection master, the deformation's on, we'll drop this, and when I drag out this ring here, the more I drag it, the larger it gets. Now I'm going to come over here and press the move right here. This is going to activate the gyro right here, and in any four corners of this gyro there's a blank space where you can click in there within that area to move this around. Not really going to get in depth about how to use this gyro, but anyway, but the scale size is a little bit too much for me, and I can select the scale here, and I will bring my cursor off away from the gyro and drag towards it. We'll scale it down, and if I drag it away in the opposite direction, it makes it larger. So when I get the scale size down to approximate where I want it, we'll go to move mode, and I want to change the depth. When I want to change the depth, I'll drag towards it to bring it in, or drag away from it to bring it back out. When I'm happy with where I want it at, I'll just press the projection master so it'll apply to the mesh. I'll turn a little bit, and got a little more jaggedness around the edge here, so I'll hold the shift key and just kind of smooth this out just a little bit. I brought up this cube through the light box here and the project file and the default cube here, and we're going to use the projection with texture. So if I press the projection master and drop now, it's going to ask me if I want to use the active texture or as a active poly painting. Let's press cancel for right now. Example, in case you run into this problem, if we come down to the UV map here and we delete the UVs here, press the projection master, go through the same process. We're going to apply some texture this time. Now it's going to tell me that I need some UVs. It says please apply UV mapping and try again. So basically, if you want to have UVs, you would select one of these, or you could use the UV master through the plugin here, and this is actually the real good one right here, and I would highly recommend that. So let's Control Z this back and bring it back here. Then we'll just kind of bring it all back. So we're going to activate the texture here. So as you can see, the object here was in view, but it's kind of small, and this is kind of important to know. So basically, I'm going to select the simple brush here. I will go ahead and I'm going to select this checker pattern right here, and I'm going to switch to, well, the drag rect. I think I already switched that, and I'm going to drag this out till it fills it up. Then I'm going to go ahead and project this on. Now when I scale it up, it doesn't look too bad. So I Control Z that. Now if I texture it when it's kind of way back there, let's do this again, and I'll drag it out. Then when I scale it back up, you can see it gets a little bit blurry, and it's losing, it's getting kind of pixelated. I don't know if you can see it in the video. So what I would recommend when you are using the projection master and you are painting is press the F on the keyboard or the frame, and this will frame everything up very close, and this will apply the texture a whole lot better. Let's just make a clone of this right real quick, and we'll Control Z this, and we're going to do this for the little comparison here. And I'll drag that out. I'm running out of screen to drag on. Let's move this over a little bit here. And you can see how that works. Now if I switch these cubes here, let's take a look what we got here. That is blurry. That one is not blurry. So you can kind of tell the difference. That one is blurry. Let me move my cursor so you can see there. And that one's a lot crisper. And it doesn't matter which size I scaled at, it's always going to look fairly decent. This is a recap, and I do these kind of fast in the recap because it's really simple to understand. Store morph, when we click this, stores the original shape what you see here at this active points. Once we deform the mesh by editing it, we now have this option to switch back to the original state or switch it back to the deformed shape. We have the delete morph. This will allow us to delete a morph, and once we delete it we can start a new morph. We have the create difference mesh. Whatever is the difference, when we edit the original mesh, we create a difference mesh. So basically when we select this, we have the new mesh. This was actually the only thing I did was deformed it, and this is the only mesh that it's going to create. We have the morph slider here. Basically this blends from the deformed shape back to the original stored morph target shape. We also remember we could also set this to the negative. Then we had the project morph. As you recall, if we have some twisted up edges and polygons, this was a way to tweak and fix it. And through this whole thing, this morph distance here has been grayed out, is because this only works with z-spheres. And we need to store the morph. Then we have the morph distance slider active. This is a quick recap on the polypaint. With the colorized on, this allowed us to go in and out of polypaint mode. This was the same way if we went up to subtools and selected the paint brush icon to go in and out of polypaint mode. We had the gradient here. Gradient colors allowed us to blend the colors off a little bit smoother off on the edges. We had polypaint from texture. Once we had a texture here, it would apply the texture to it. Control Z that. We had the polypaint from polygroups. Once we had a mesh that had some groups to this, it would create a texture. If we come down to the UV map, as you can see, we see no texture here. Then if we press new from polypaint, this will show the new texture. When painting with the projection master with texture, as you can see down here, it allows us to have good texture on here no matter what subdivision level we have. As we have it down to 1 and we turn on the texture, it looks good. Turn it up to 2, still looks good. At 3, still looks good. Turn that down to 1, take one more look, and turn it back on. This was different with the poly painting, as we had to crank up the subdivision levels to the highest when applying texture to make it look good. So this was two different ways that we can kind of compare this. As example, let's go ahead and crank this up real quick. We'll just turn this off for right now. Polypaint from the texture, which will be this texture here. Looks good at the highest subdivision level. Looks real blurry at the lowest subdivision level. This is polypaint now, not texture.